So, if you're joining us today, this is our smarter tools and best practices for mobile debugging. And today we've got some really incredible speakers. Like I mentioned, I'm Sarah Guthels. I lead DevRel here at Sentry. I'm actually going to be doing some live streaming of building a Flutter app later. We'll see how that goes. I've never built a Flutter app before, so we're gonna try this out. But I am not the mobile expert here. I am also here to learn from these two brilliant engineers. We've got Philipp here. Philipp is a senior software engineer here at Sentry. Philipp's been a mobile engineer and now helps all mobile engineers be able to debug effectively, primarily working on our iOS SDKs. Philipp, do you want to say anything else about who you are?
Yeah, no, mostly I'm working on the iOS SDK, but fun fact, I've been an Android engineer for 4 years before I joined Sentry, actually, so I know both worlds.
Yep. Yeah, so that's part of why I'm doing Flutter, that we don't seem to have I mean, I know it's, but yeah, we need some more expertise there. So I'm going to pretend to be an expert. Um, we'll see how that goes. And then we also have Simon here. Simon is one of our brilliant partners that we work with. You might have seen some of the video tutorials that he's been publishing. We even collaborated on a blog post around kind of effective debugging techniques and tools that mobile engineers can benefit from. Simon also runs galaxies.dev, and he is running right now a zero to hero mission, which is like launching your first app. It's a full course, even if you have no experience. There's links in the resources on Zoom, and I will also be sharing them in the YouTube chat and description below if you're watching this after the fact. But we're really excited to have Simon here, primarily to give us the React Native perspective. Simon, do you want to share anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think you summarized it pretty well. Hi, I'm Simon. Glad to be here as well. I'm sorry to hear you have to work with Flutter soon. I will do my best to promote React Native on this workshop. We all have a history. So I come from Ionic and Capacitor and all things web. So
Yep.
yeah, we've been through a lot of tools, but I knew Sentry all at that time already, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Our React Native support and our kind of native iOS and Android support seems to be the more like advanced support that we have within Sentry. But Flutter, Maui, even still some Xamarin, like we still support kind of most frameworks that you might be using, whether you're on mobile, web, backend, front end, whatever you're doing. But today we're going to be talking more about debugging your mobile applications. And this is going to be very hands-on. Simon and Philipp are going to be mostly demoing real or contrived, but based off of real applications for you to show you how quick and easy it is to set up Sentry, what tools might be useful for you depending on what types of errors or performance issues you might be debugging, and how to leverage and get kind of the most out of it. As a quick reminder, Sentry does application monitoring. This is errors, this is performance, and really you can kind of think about Sentry as an entire platform for supporting your debugging journey. So we try to make it extremely actionable for all engineers, regardless of what framework and what stack you're working with, to not only know that there's an issue, preferably before the majority of your users know, but also be able to drill down deep all the way to the line of code if you've set up your integrations with things like GitHub, to identify what the issue is, whom on your team it might be the best to resolve the issue, and even suggest some fixes for your issue with things like our Solutions Hub and our auto fix. So really just kind of like your debugging tool all up. One thing to note is that Sentry is fair source, and if you're unfamiliar with that, basically it means that you can self-host Sentry. The majority of our code is on GitHub, so you can self-host. But we also have some really generous plans, including our indie developer plan, which is free for individual developers, and then really I'm going to use the word like cheap, like not very expensive team and business plans. So if you want to learn more about Sentry and getting started with it, you don't have to invest any dollars to do that. You can get started today with giving it a try. And that's what we're going to show off today. All right. That is my quick spiel. As a quick reminder of housekeeping, if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A, or if you're on YouTube, feel free to just ask right there in the chat. We will be monitoring all chats and Q&As throughout, answering some questions live and answering some questions in text. As I mentioned, links will be added to the description in YouTube as well. If you are tuning in on Zoom, then we will be sending you a recording of this as well, but it is directly available on YouTube right now and the second that this live is over. And there will be a survey, so please don't forget to submit it. Awesome. Someone already mentioned that they learned how to write compiler plugins from the Sentry code base. That is awesome. I absolutely love that. And that's one reason why I chose to work at Sentry is I think being fair source, open source, however you want to describe the act of sharing your code and sharing what you've learned so that other folks can benefit from that, I think is great. We just launched a blog post the other day, slight tangent, on how we've offered support for Unity and Unreal for game developers and building those plugins. And the whole blog post was about how we built the plugins. It's fascinating. I encourage you to go check it out. Okay, but enough about that. Let's get started with the actual workshop. We're going to start with debugging React Native apps, primarily focusing on using session replay for those kind of front-end applications. But Simon's going to start with like, how difficult is it to actually start using Sentry with your React Native app? And then we're going to move into debugging iOS apps with Philipp and really diving into some of those performance issues. You're going to see a lot of things kind of replicated across so that you can kind of, whether you're a React Native developer or an iOS developer, or even newly founded Flutter developer, you'll be able to benefit and see kind of the ways in which Sentry helps you. We will do some Q&A throughout. Yes, Android is the same as well. Today, we're just using these as examples, but you'll see because they're so similar, our Android support is nearly identical to kind of the iOS support, for example. We will do some Q&A throughout, but we will leave some time at the very end for Q&A, and that's enough talking from me. Let's hear from the experts. So Simon, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and let you share your screen.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen right now.
Looks great.
Awesome. That's good. So primarily, I want to talk about 4 things today. So first, we're going to tackle the general integration quickly. And that's also the part Sarah just mentioned. There will be somewhat similar to what Philipp is showing you, because across all frameworks and languages, it's mostly the same. Then second part, we're going to dive more into like actually debugging with Sentry and using some of the features to get into the code and see stuff like the session replay in action. As the third element, I found a neat tool that was kind of buried in the Sentry docs, which might get more popular over time. So looking forward to show you that. And finally, I want to also show you not only like the demo projects and the tutorials, but also how Sentry actually looks in a real project, because I actually also have some applications on the store, not successful, but nonetheless, they're on the store and they, of course, deliver some problems. So let's start with the first part. I'm here in a completely blank new React Native project. I won't give you like the whole tour of Expo Router and what this project is about. You will get these projects if you're a React Native developer and if you're using Expo. The question is, how do we integrate Sentry now? Well, first of all, I would highly recommend you create your account at Sentry. And then you can choose your platform here on this page. You can see there's actually a bunch of options. Of course, I want to use this one. Is there Flutter? Yeah, there's actually Flutter as well. There's also Go in this list. This is interesting. But anyway, I'm going to go with React Native.
Over 100 languages and frameworks.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I will give this project a name. I will call it Livestream for the moment, and then I will just hit Create Project. The integration now works pretty easily with React Native, as I can just run this one npx command in my project, and it usually guides me completely through the whole process of what I have to do. So running this command, and this is always like challenging to do this live, but I have complete trust in this command. So do you want to install it? Yeah, I kind of installed it before, but let's do it again because it's a small package. It should be fairly fast. I want to use Sentry.io. I don't want to self-host it right now. And I do have an account. So I will go with yes. This will bring up a little view here. to select my project. We're going to select the live stream project we just created a second ago. And once this is done, we got some changes to our project. So all of these changes are printed out here to your terminal. Things like my layout is updated, my config, my env. But let's quickly take a look at this. I haven't successfully sent a test event, no, but I can get to that in a second. We can just copy paste this button into my project. Let's just go into the index page, place it somewhere here. Okay, gonna add the button from React Native. We're gonna add Sentry from React Native. Thank you, Cursor, for code completion and making my life so much easier. And once I do a little, yeah, we detected a change in Metro config, so I'm restarting Expo Go. Yeah, do whatever we want. In the meantime, I will show you what this integration did as well. So it simply added this one snippet here. I can actually remove, these are comments. We don't really care about them. It just added this one DSN line with a Sentry in it to my topmost layout, wrapping my application with this. And additionally, I got the env, which holds my Sentry auth token and the Metro config. So all of this is really handy. And in my application, let's see, I should be able to open this up on iOS. Let's do a quick reload here. I got my button up here. So I click this try button. This won't do anything here because it's just like throwing a little Sentry exception like internally. This is not doing a real exception. But at this point, we should be able to see this actually in our project. So if I now go into the issues, let's go into a live stream. And yeah, here it is. First error appeared instantly 24 seconds ago. So I can also zoom a bit into this. And with just pretty much one line of code, you see, I also get this mapping right to my code. So this took us like, I made a stop clock. It probably took us 3 minutes from setting up the project to having our first exception right here. And I could now easily debug my application. Now, this is just the starting point. Now, I wanted to show you a bit more beyond this basic integration. And I could build out this application, but this is somewhat challenging. If you know React Native, you know that for many things, you're going to have to make a pre-build nowadays with Expo because the Expo Go application is sort of limited. And so I created this other application up front. This is actually from
And I'm just
my
going to
new
pause
zero...
you for 2 seconds, Simon.
Yeah,
Someone
absolutely.
mentioned in the chat, like, oh my gosh, the setup is so fast, you can almost miss it. And yeah, essentially, Simon ran the wizard, which was super straightforward. You just answer some questions, it does the work for you. But as you mentioned, the work that it does for you is essentially just doing the sentry.init, putting in your DSN, wrapping your application. One thing I did want to mention, though, the details with Expo, because this has come up on multiple occasions where folks are like, okay, I'm using Expo Go. Sentry works with Expo. It definitely does. However, if you're not using Expo, that's totally fine. This is still just a React Native app, so it does not have to be Expo. But the trick that you just mentioned, Simon, or the tricky thing is that you will likely need to do some pre-builds so that you can actually get your native builds. And Sentry can reference those. So to get the most out of using Sentry, particularly things like session replay, you're going to want to make sure that you get those pre-builds. And that's something that takes time. And so Simon prepared like a separate app for that. The first app being just kind of a very basic React Native app. It does not have to be Expo, can just be basic React Native. And it's literally just that init with the DSN. These other options that are included here are things like session replay, profiling, tracing, etc., which we have some documentation on. And our session replay for mobile just went GA today. So I'll share a link for that blog post as well. It'll no longer be under experiments.
Let's take a look at that. Somebody in the chat mentioned this as well, that you can just wrap your application. And that's pretty much what I did here in my other app. The previous integration was, as Sarah said, the basic. This would probably be like the extended setup. We have some flags for attaching screenshots when a problem occurs. We have something about tracing, which will Philipp discuss in detail a bit more. We also have under the integrations now the Sentry mobile replay integration, which is the thing Sarah just mentioned, which is pretty awesome that we're going to take a look at now. And all of this now works a bit different. You can also wrap your application with this ref, and then what somebody mentioned in the chat is probably what we see down here, where we wrap our root layout using Sentry. So this would be my other application, and I think in that application there was a problem. So I saw this bug. Someone had a problem error adding to favorites, and I was like, why? Why is that possible? If I go into an application, I'm definitely able to add something to my favorites. So I was curious, and turns out we can just go into the session replay of that bug. So that should maybe give us more information. So if we now watch this replay here, we can see users navigating around. They check out Empire Strikes Back. Okay, works great. When is it failing? Oh, they want to. Oh, yeah. Oh. They tried to bookmark the least or the probably worst of the Star Wars movies as a favorite, which might throw a problem in my code.
Or
If
you
we
could just not have them as users because clearly there's something wrong with them.
There must be something wrong. Yeah,
No.
absolutely.
And that was
Nothing
really quick
against
though,
you if you
right?
like that.
Right. So you added in the integrations here. You have so session replay, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a video-like reproduction of what's happening on your user's actual device. So what Simon was just showing you there, that's okay, technically his, because this is a demo, but like that would be your user's actual device, regardless of what device they're using, Android, iOS, etc. And what did you have to do other than those options to be able to see this replay?
Besides these options, honestly, nothing. I just had to make the pre-build with React Native and Expo. That's all. And then I can define these things. So in this video, you see that there are actually text and numbers. And if you have like a banking application or something else, you probably don't want the numbers to appear in your debugging information. So that's why there's these different settings. So you can either mask all images, mask all text, or even mask all vectors. And just prior to this call, I discovered that there's a more granular feature now included in the React Native SDK. So you can now actually define for specific views for specific text the sentry.mask, so you have even more control, not just say like mask all text or mask all images. This would give you even more options. So in the case of this problem, it looks like we might have some issue on the ID page here for my film. And yeah, looks like I made a little mistake here when I built the application, in that I added a little error here handling. Is this a joke if I want to do this? And if somebody really tries to mark this as a favorite, we're going to throw a new error. And that's what was caught by Sentry and what also showed up in the error log. By the way, we looked at the different things. We looked at the session replay and we looked at the list of the issue, but you can also get all information in like one place. So here is the top level issue, which would show, okay, in code, or that's actually our first one. Here it is. This should be linked at some point to my specific error. Error adding favorites. This should be, yeah, this is the actual error. So here's the combined error, which has the line of code where the problem occurred. The session replay is down here. And what we can see as well here is right when it crashed, another screenshot, including a bunch of information about like my device and all other things that caused this crash. So this is really helpful. There are also a couple of other things that we don't have to go into detail that make session replay really great. You get like, when you watch the replay, you get the breadcrumbs. You actually resolve the React components to their names, because Sentry added something to the Metro config, which allows you to annotate the React components. There's nothing you have to do. You just set this up once in your Metro config, and then it just keeps working. Now, on top of that, and I know I'm already out of my time almost, I wanted to show you one more thing, or actually two more things. The one more thing is that I discovered a tool called Spotlight by Sentry. It was kind of hidden somewhere in the docs. I have no idea where I found it, but this is a super handy tool, and I can highly recommend it to everyone. With the Spotlight, what you can do is, so I have my application here up and running. and it should be connected to Spotlight. So if I now go to a different tab, I think the People's tab also throws an error, and you immediately see this error shows up here in my Spotlight view. So this is like Sentry local, I would say. That would be a good name for it, by the way. There are also traces and performance and things that Philipp will touch upon in a second. But just from here, seeing this type error, there's a pretty cool thing. I can just click this tiny green thing, which you probably don't even think is clickable. And once you press that, it actually opens up VS Code and throws me right into the line where the problem happened. I haven't seen this before with any other tool, and I found this kind of fascinating. So maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it. I just wanted to show it because I was really excited when I found this, and I just keep it open, connected to Sidecar. Yeah, I keep it. You could also have it like a sidecar on your iPad, right? That would be like the perfect format for Spotlight, probably.
Definitely.
So
Yeah,
highly
one thing that
recommend.
I love is, so with Sentry you can have your dev build, you can have your production build, and so you can actually get errors that are in your dev environment and be able to, like, if you're actively debugging or actively creating a new feature, you can leverage that. But Spotlight, I think, is a super interesting kind of version of that in a slightly more local way. So rather than having to, actually push those errors and like run something in your dev environment, you can just run it more locally. And if you head over to the Spotlight, I don't know, because I don't know that it would work with Android native.
I think it's more made for JavaScript
Because
applications.
it
Yeah.
is more for the web, and so it just happens to
Yeah.
also work with React Native because it's React Native. But that is something that, like, we are actively seeking feedback on, and looking to see kind of where folks might find
It
useful.
also works for Android and iOS.
Does
I
it?
just shared a
Okay.
link. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Perfect. Ignore me then. That's why Philip is here. But yeah, so I think yeah, check those out. I think the other thing that I just wanted to mention, some folks were asking about some of the performance impact of something like Session Replay. I shared a link to that as well. And then Philip, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit, once it's your session, on things like, do we get information about app load times, like app start times and things like that? Because we do have a question in the Q&A about having an app hang on the splash screen, and we definitely have some support for that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll leave that to Philip.
Yep.
Regarding the load, I just want to say that right here you can see that I set my replay session sample rate to 1 and replay error sample rate to 1. This means that every error and every session is sent directly to Sentry, and probably you don't want to do this in production. I don't know what's a good value. Maybe Philip can even tell you what's like the best values to use here. As far as I know, for the error, you still want to catch every error, so you get all the session replays for the errors, but probably not for every single user session out there. So that was the quick code example here. I just want to wrap it up by saying that I'm not just teaching people to use Sentry. I actually use it in my own projects as well. Here it looks more like the Wild West because I have so many errors right now in my application I haven't worked on because I prepared so much for this workshop, of course. But it's just like really helpful stuff. For example, here I had this one were just rejected because Apple Health Kit didn't work, and that actually led me to discover that there was a problem with an underlying native module that connects to Apple Health Kit, and it worked totally fine here on my device when I developed the application, and I wouldn't have noticed this. And it actually crashes on a lot of devices. It happened 43 times over the last 30 days, so it's a frequent problem. But even beyond that, I get more granular information. For example, here's some random Axios error, which I can't really debug to an exact line of code. However, diving into this, at the bottom, I find that I make some requests to like a specific API to get food facts. This is a quick tracker application for food. That people made a request here, which actually looked fine, but then I tried to open it and I understood that this actually returns like something about the product not found. And these kind of errors are just like, I don't discover them locally. I test with my like products that I use day to day and everything works fine. And then suddenly in production, I get all of these errors. So this is really where Sentry has helped me a lot. Now, if I just had the time to fix them in my busy day, if Sentry could give me a few more hours per day, that would be even better.
Hey, with autofix, we're trying. We're trying.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing something cool with AI tools, right?
Yeah. Autofix is one of our newer things that we've launched where we offer up an analysis of kind of these errors and suggest where the issues might be, and then also suggest a fix for you. And we'll even open a PR on GitHub for you. So it's pretty handy
Right.
over there, the solutions hub right there, if you set up Sentry AI.
Right.
And that being said, someone did ask a question about privacy. So first of all, Sentry is extremely privacy first. We don't even have cookies on our marketing sites because we don't even want your data when you're just trying to get information and like review our docs and things like that. Number one, all of the masking happens not on Sentry servers, so we're not even getting that information. We do expect that you know what is personally identifiable information versus what isn't, but the session replay team does make sure that the very basic of things, like things that are typically credit card number style or things like that, are going to be masked anyways. But I did share some links to our privacy specifically for React Native session replay that you can read into. But that's why we want to give you the tools to be able to decide what should be masked and what shouldn't be. Someone also asked about Crashlytics versus Sentry, and I shared a couple of things. One is just kind of a general marketing page on the difference between Crashlytics and Sentry, and then also that we have like a full comparison developer guide for it that you just have to fill out a form. It's free, and then you should have everything you need. Awesome. This was great, Simon. I'm just going to review a couple of the last questions. Can breadcrumbs be used independently of errors, for instance, to track user actions without requiring an error event? So that's similar to kind of metrics, which is not something that Sentry is doing right now. But as Simon mentioned, kind of in these sample rates, you can, especially in development, we don't recommend you do this in production, get 100% of sessions and error sample rates. So then that way you can, for every error that's popping up, you can get that full replay, get all of the breadcrumbs, etc. And then those breadcrumbs also exist on the errors and on the issues page within Sentry as well. Splash screen, yeah, so we'll talk about the splash screen right shortly. And if you are having any trouble with anything that you're seeing today, whether it be Spotlight, as I'm seeing in the chat, or getting started with React Native or with Expo, making sure you're getting that pre-build right, you can also hop into our Discord. I will share our Discord right now. And we have engineers and just tons of folks there all the time, ready to answer your questions as well. So feel free to jump in there and we can help debug more specifically. And then last question before we move on to Philip, should you be using Sentry to track network errors in the front end project, or do you set up a separate one for backend services? So what we recommend is that you have a project for essentially kind of each of your services. So you might have like your React Native project, and that might be communicating with some other service that you run, I don't know, where your databases are, or whatever you're doing. But if you do set them up within the same Sentry org, we will show you errors across all of those projects. So if you're seeing a slowdown on the front end, but it's actually being caused by a slow database query, we will actually help you trace that all the way down to that other project in that line of code as well. Awesome. I want to echo the chat, Simon. Like the way that you presented this makes it seem so easy. And I think it is, for what it's worth. Like literally, this is your setup, this is your code. And upon receiving an error, you're able to debug it quickly, whether it be within Spotlight as you're debugging locally or with your users as you've deployed to the App Store. So thank you.
Yeah, happy. I'll stop my share so Philip can take over and go a bit deeper into the magic here.
I'm excited. All right.
Me
We're
too. I love
moving,
seeing iOS code.
right? Yeah, that I thought about maybe doing iOS, and then I'm like, no, I think Flutter might be easier. I don't know. iOS scares me, so I'm excited.
It scares you. Okay, that's interesting.
It feels like a whole other world. I don't know. Even though I'm on Mac 24/7, like iOS specifically.
Yeah, it definitely is another world. Yeah, but let's get started then. So this is an iOS sample I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you again a little bit how session replay works on iOS. It should be pretty similar to how it looks on React Native, also on Flutter, and on Android. So this presentation isn't really iOS specific. And Simon already showed you how easy it is to set up Sentry. So you just need to, similar what you do in React Native, you just need to start the SDK. You need to add it to your dependencies. You need to pass in the DSN. There is also a wizard for the iOS SDK that you can use, or you just can copy and paste those things in. The first thing I did is I enabled session replay. Simon already explained what a sample rate is, meaning like all session replays will end up in Sentry. Picking a proper value here can be a bit tricky. So if you are an app that has millions of users, maybe you're good with even just 1%, or maybe you're just good with 10%. If you just have 1,000 users, maybe you want to see every error or every crash. I think it's really hard to actually give a good recommendation. What this value should be, you have to decide it yourself. But for debugging, I always use 100% because it's super annoying if you have an error and you don't see it. I also enabled tracing and profiling. If you never heard about these, just wait a bit. I will explain what this is. And the best thing is that you actually look at how that stuff looks in Sentry. I built this beautiful sample app with Sentry colors there. It's very simple. It's just has a simple form. I can enter my first name, I can enter my last name, and I can change the email address. Oops, it just went completely away. I'm going to enter it again. Oops. It's just complaining a bit, sorry. And now we rotated the device. I can change the email address and things. That's basically it. And there is a field, a view that shows text, which is really, really slow. It's just some sample text, but we will see later what causes this slowdown. But let's now dive into session replay. So I would like to see if I have any errors. So let's assume I released this app to the App Store, and I will just go into my Sentry issues. That's what also Simon showed you previously. I would see here also app hangs. I already had some app hangs here. So if the application is unresponsive for over 200 milliseconds, 2 seconds, I would see this here. And I have one specific error I would like to take a look at, and that's a form validation error that's happening when I fill out this form. And it says like, hey, the configure isn't called. Simon already showed you what all this stuff means here. Like there's so much data that helps you to understand, to narrow down the search, what caused the problem. I see that it's an iPhone, I see which iOS version it is. But the most important thing is always the stack trace. So I see here in the form view controller, in editing did end email, this error happens. So the first thing when I fix a bug is usually I would just directly go to the code, and I would set a breakpoint in the error method, and I would try to reproduce it. So I already have the debugger attached here. So what I would do is I would just go to the form. I would again change the name, and I would really try to play around with it to reproduce the error. But the breakpoint doesn't hit. So I don't know what is causing this. And luckily, we have a session replay attached here. So I can go to the session replay and I can see exactly what the user did. And here we see how masking works. So on the right side here, you see the form, and on the left side, you see what the screenshots and the video is looking like in Sentry. So we highlight, we will remove the text. I don't see any names. I don't see an email address. So if you have any privacy concerns, per default, you can just say like, hey, disable everything, don't show any text. And we even have like some custom things and configurations that you can use to ensure that you're not leaking any user data. But now let's go back and see what the user did. Just came in here. Okay, click the second one. Then you click the last one, the email, and then the error happened. Okay, that's interesting. Let's try this. Maybe I just go there again. I click the last name and I click email. And if I go away, boom. Now I see that the error happens. And this seems like there's maybe some weird state happening in my form validation logic that causes this error. And if I go here, I would immediately go to the is last invalid validation checking part, and I see that I actually added some wanted side effect there. If you call if you don't call the first name validation before calling the last name validation, I just flip a boolean here and then I throw an error here. I mean, that's simplified drastically, of course, but this shows you how you can use session replay to know exactly what the user did to narrow down the problem. And I could easily fix the bug now, which is coming out this code here. I go back to the form. And now if I go to the last name and I change the email address, it should be working. And now I just fixed the bug.
This is something that, like, even though the example is fairly, small and contrived, like it really does speak to one of the hardest problems, I think, particularly for mobile developers versus web developers, is who knows, like, what device, what version of the OS, and what your users are thinking and doing when they're, clicking on within your app. And I think sometimes we forget kind of those order of operations, or just kind of this unexpected user behavior, which I find is more likely to happen on mobile devices than not, because of the, like switching it to the background and then bringing it back to the foreground, connecting to power, disconnecting from power, connecting to a Wi-Fi versus going to, 5G or LTE or whatever you're on. And I think that type of metadata and information and the ability to actually visually see what your users are doing on their device versus on, I did a talk on your iPhone 16 Pro Max Plus or whatever newest version there is. That's the hardest part, I think. And I think this example, while fairly simple, really speaks to that. Like, you can't even reproduce the error locally if you don't know what that order of steps was that your users were taken for that particular error. And someone just asked, is session replay stable? Yes. For iOS, Android, and React Native, we are GA as of, we actually technically went GA last week, but we had kind of a week to make sure things were going well. And we've been in beta for about 8 months prior to that. So we are stable. And someone also asked about some of the pricing, and I'm going to include that here, but we have a fairly liberal kind of pricing model for this. Session replay is included in all plans, including our free developer plan, and you can always add additional replays if that's what you need.
Cool. Then let's continue with tracing and profiling. So tracing and profiling, you can both use for analyzing performance issues in your app. And if I go back to my app, I see here that this text view controller just takes forever to load the text. The logic here is pretty simple. What we just do is on a background thread here, you don't need to know iOS code, but it's basically just putting stuff to the background thread. We load some file from the disk, and then we filter text on it. So we actually check if there's only ASCII characters in there. So maybe if the user is entering it and you just want to ensure that there's not malicious characters are in there, malicious code or something in there, you just want to filter on it, and then we populate this to the text view. And before we take a look at the Sentry data, I would like you to understand two concepts, and those are TTID and TTFD. Those are abbreviations. So TTID stands for time to initial display. So that's the time, how long it takes when the user clicks the button until the next screen renders its first frame. We can automatically detect this because we know when the screen is rendered, and we also know when the first frame is drawn. But when the screen is fully loaded with all the stuff there, so maybe if you pull some data from the backend, it could take a while, and we don't know exactly when you finished with that. So you have to use a manual API for this. And this is what I do here after actually adding the text to the text view and just assigning it to the text view. But now let's have a look at the performance data in Sentry. I use a tool here that's called Discover, which is really useful when you already know the problem and you know where to look, and you can easily find single specific transactions, and you really can narrow it down and find single events. So what is actually a transaction? So a transaction, that's the root part of our performance product. It's basically a list, a timeline list, a tree view of things happening in your application. So this is a transaction. A transaction consists of one or multiple spans, and each of those spans can have multiple children. And each span has a start timestamp and an end timestamp, and it's basically just a timeline view of what happened. We see here that the TTID is pretty fast, 30 milliseconds, but the time to full display takes around 4 seconds, which is really long. And if we scroll down here, we see that here the file is red. It's taking around 2 milliseconds, which I think is okay. But then there's a huge gap after this. So there's, I don't know what's happening here. And what we can do is we can take a look at the profile. Because we started the profile previously, the profile is just collected and it's assigned to this specific transaction. If you now get a bit confused when looking at the profile, don't worry. It's actually a bit complicated at the first glance. Here's the transaction. It's again a timeline view. You see here the transactions, all the things that happened, but we're interested in what happened here until the full display occurs. Simply put, a profile is just a timeline view of your stack trace. So what the profiler does, it takes a snapshot of your stack trace of your code every couple milliseconds, and then just turns it into a timeline view. So at the top, you see here application, the main entry point, the main function is at the top. And the more you scroll down, the more you see like code of your own application. What we see here is that in the text view controller, the filter text method just keeps popping up and popping up, meaning that this takes a lot of time. And even we see here that sequence contains is eating up loads of time. So we can now go back to our code. And the first thing that some might have spotted already is that we're filtering the text, which takes a long time on the main thread, which is not good. So we would block the main thread. But if we run this now again, I'm pretty sure this won't make it faster. So the only thing is that we don't block it on the main thread, but it still takes some time to load when you click on it. So we actually need to investigate what's causing the slowdown in filter text. We have here a for loop on the text. So for every character in the text, we iterate over this whole array. That's what's happening here. That's also what we saw in the profile. The sequence contains just iterates over it. So we could use a set here to speed this up, or we just use a Swift built-in function that is called isAscII. And then we run it again, and I'm pretty sure that this should speed up the code quite a bit. So let's have a look. Okay, it's already way faster, but still there is some delay happening. You see there's some delay happening. So what we can do is we can go back to our Discover board, and Sentry is pretty fast actually. It's almost real time. We can have a look at a recent transaction. So we already see that the transaction duration went down from around 4 to 5 seconds to 700 milliseconds. But still the TTID is taking forever. What we see down here is that the file read of the lorem ipsum file is happening pretty late. It's happening view did appear. That's a lifecycle method of the screen, meaning that it only loads it when the screen already appeared. That seems a bit odd. So let's fix this quickly. We can just say, do this when the view is loading. So just when the view gets loaded into memory, and it's bound to the view hierarchy and is about to be displayed, we can already kick off the background thread, and we can already get the text and just show it. Oh, wow, that's really fast, you see? That's blazingly fast. We can have one final look at the transaction, and then I think we should see that everything should be way faster. That's the recent one. Yeah, duration even went down. We see also that the duration didn't really go down, but what we see now is that the TTFD is around 150 milliseconds. I think that's acceptable. Parsing this file, I think we could go even like more into detail and try to fix it and even improve it more, but at least the user experience now seems way, way faster. To sum it up, just remember what a trace is. A trace is like some user action. A trace consists of a transaction. It can even be multiple transactions. So as we mentioned previously, if you have a backend connected and you set it up properly, if there is a HTTP request and you set it up properly, you would even see the transaction from the backend. So if the backend transaction is slow, I could just click here and I could investigate the backend transaction. I could even investigate the backend profile. So the transaction contains multiple spans. And we also took a look at the profile, which is basically just a timeline view of your stack traces. And I think that's it.
I love it. I love the like dive into profiles and trace views. And commenting on what Philip said, like what's the difference? When are they useful? When like how do you use these effectively when you're debugging? This is all stuff that isn't fairly obvious. So if this is new to you, don't stress too much about this being new and something that you might need to learn. It was actually a conversation that Philip, Simon, and I had when we were doing kind of the prep for this call. Was like, okay, but when would you actually use this? When is this actually useful? And that's really what this whole conversation's about. We've got about 10 minutes left. There's still some questions here in the chat. But I think overall, something that I just want to briefly talk about is kind of the challenges when you're debugging mobile applications. And again, we've talked about a couple of these throughout. One being like, who knows what device your users are on, right? Who knows? Henri, who goes by Henri Helvetica, who's an engineer in Toronto, he gives this talk about that where he's got stats on like the hundreds of different Android devices that people are using globally. And you are not likely to even be able to understand what limitations folks are running into. And so depending on your user base, depending on kind of how your app is being used and by who, being able to actually just see that real data when you're debugging something, I think is critical. And that's why we wanted to highlight session replay as one of the entry points into the deeper and more contextualized and complex information that you might find in the trace view or in the profiles. But I'm curious, Philip and Simon, kind of from your perspectives, what other like gotchas when debugging mobile applications are really challenging that are somewhat unique to mobile engineers versus web developers or even like game developers or something like that.
I mean, I think you touched on the probably biggest thing, which is like just the variety of devices. If Philip is doing iOS development, he's even kind of lucky because, I mean, at some point you knew which iOS devices exist and which sizes you had. At this point, it's also kind of fractured. But looking at Android, it's a total mess. Like, it's just not possible to test all the stores and all the devices and all the different distributions. It's impossible. And then like on top of that, you got probably different environments. You got a dev environment, a Q&A environment, a prod environment, and like everyone's just like confused about, okay, I'm running this version on this application, and here is my crash. And it's just something that you totally lose control over if you're like alone or if you have a small team. It's so hard to keep up with these things to just like who's on which version. Maybe we rolled out a fix in version 1.2.1 and that person is on 1.1.0. Just like having all the information as well always integrated in the Sentry error reporting, whether it's the issue or the session replay, is unbelievable helpful, at least for me to like quickly at a glance see, okay, we're talking about this device, this OS version, this app version. Okay, let's go, let's fix this. This saves you a lot of time when you try to replicate a bug in the real world.
Yeah. Philip, anything different?
No, I think I can fully sign that. I just wish, like my previous company, I was working with Bluetooth on Android, plenty. And whoever did that knows what I'm talking about. At least 5 years ago, it was still pretty hard to get it right. And we had so many issues where people just complain, hey, it doesn't work, and I did this and that and this and that. And having something like Session Replay, I would see, hey, I just turn it on for a specific user, maybe, even if it's maybe, showing some privacy stuff, which it doesn't by default. If the user says okay to this, you would see exactly what they did. You would see exactly their data, and you could easily investigate this. And even without this, you would see if there's some connection issues happening. You know exactly what they did. Did they put the app into the background? Did they click certain steps in the app? And it was mostly always because users did things you didn't anticipate, like, I don't know, they just canceled the pairing process of some Bluetooth device in between. And it was like, okay, that's why it's not working. And it would have solved me a lot of headaches back then. I know, like, not many apps have Bluetooth on Android, but that's a specific scenario. I would have been very, very glad to have had a tool like Sentry, but it didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah. We're still getting some questions around kind of the performance, and I want to make sure we address that. Philip did do at the end of the demo, just before he went into the profile and the trace view, showed kind of like a page within, or a screen rather, within the app that took a long time to load because it just had a lot of data. And then there's also some questions about what happens when it the app crashes and then it recovers, but we're having hard time detecting those. And then I think kind of along those lines, the idea of what happens when you're moving from like foreground to background. So as like a super quick, I'll just share this as well. So this is an example of a replay on our Empower Plant demo app where we sell not really, but like walkers for plants. And a couple of things that I just wanted to call out if we didn't get to see those in the previous replays. Like I mentioned, we do have device battery, so we can see like it's at 100% battery and it's not currently being charged. If that changes, things will get updated. We have, as I mentioned before, kind of that distributed tracing. So there was actually an error in our Flask backend and M+1 query issue that we're detecting right at the beginning. We also noticed that the device connectivity is connected to Wi-Fi versus not. And we can see that it's in the foreground, right? And then we can start to see like user taps navigations, and then if it moves out of the foreground, et cetera. So we do try to provide that contextual information there. We were getting some questions around kind of like that splash screen, that app start. You would get those, you should be getting those issues within your replays or as issues as well. If you are having some issues though, someone mentioned like Sentry's not detecting them despite users experiencing them. That is something that you should definitely jump either into our Discord, or you can head into our GitHub repos. I'll share our Sentry one right now, and we've got discussion forums on there also. So if you have a specific issue, you can open it up, but also there's discussions which are fairly active. All of our engineers and PMs are here to answer your questions and to help you debug and figure out kind of what's going on. So that does sound like potentially an issue that we might want to look into with the team. So I'll also bring that back to the team. Can you integrate alerts with Microsoft Teams? Yes, definitely. So Sentry, we do have a number of integrations with pretty much every single other tool that you might be using. So here's all of them, but Microsoft Teams is right here. We have Slack, Jira, GitHub, GitLab, PagerDuty, etc. So you can go through and check out all of these different integrations that might be what you're looking for. But essentially what we're trying to do is not keep you in Sentry. What we're trying to do is help you debug as quickly as possible. So whatever kind of integration you need to be able to do that, we hope that you are able to. I'm looking through, yes, a replay does work with Swift UI. And yeah, if you want to learn how to improve your app's performance, I think just to finish that thought, like overall, the goal here is, so we do have like performance pages as well. let me just kind of pull this one up over here. So our insights page is here. So for example, this is for a specific mobile React Native app, and it's taking a little while right now. We do use Sentry on Sentry, so I'm sure someone's getting a notification for this as well. But we do have kind of our average TTIDs, which Philip was showing in his demo, most frozen frames, if that's an issue. We've got, kind of we use this user misery score to detect how miserable your users are likely feeling as a result of the slow performance of your application. This is the same that we have, as you can see, for our front end, back end, and mobile, similar kind of contextualized information for you, but you can actually go through, and I'm zoomed in a little bit, so we're missing some of that information. But you can see kind of the number of users that it's affecting, what project it's a part of, where it's happening, and on what kind of operation, et cetera. So if you are just getting reports that the app is slow as like a high level, then this insights page might be the place where you want to start, where you want to start kind of that discovery and trying to figure that out. You can see here, we also have, here's the information on app starts. So average cold starts, cold start counts, etc. We have screen loads, so specific screens, screen rendering, and then those network requests as well. So this insights page is likely where you're going to want to start if you're just kind of getting that high level.
Yeah, I forgot. I mean, I didn't mention this on purpose. So I was already knowing that I had a performance problem. If you don't know if you have one, the insights page is where you go. You just go there, you see, you get an aggregated view of like millions of transactions, thousands of transactions. We give you like recommendations, hey, which span is most likely the one that's causing a slowdown, and also which screen have slow and frozen frame animation glitches and hitches, where are network requests slowing you down. It's really powerful. It really helps you to understand where should I look. And then once you know, you can start debugging, and then you could do something like I showed you previously.
Yeah, and for those of you wanting those dystopian spider legs, I mean, I fully agree. This has a slowdown on purpose because this is our demo app. But I absolutely want my plant to walk up to me and then just yell at me and then tell me they're in a bad mood, because then maybe they wouldn't die. But that is all the time we have for today. Simon and Philip, thank you so much. You dug so deep into multiple frameworks here, or multiple, frameworks. And I appreciate kind of being able to see it from multiple sides. As I mentioned, this is already live on YouTube, so you can go check that out. This link here will give you that 14-day free trial, but pretty much you get that no matter what. And like I said, there is a free developer account. So if you want to test this out before you bring it to your management so that you can get started on the team or business plans, you should be able to test that out with all of the features for free. And don't forget to join our Discord if you have any questions, or hit us up on GitHub. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate both of your time.
Thank you. For the pleasure.
And thanks everyone for joining. All right.